there is an apple and oranges quality to trying to compare both the Cold War to this period of competition with China. But, it is an interesting arena of thought to try to understand how important ideology is in, various periods in particular regimes. My sense is that currently at the highest levels of China, again, I think an ideological frame is central to understanding them. I think they think in terms of correlations of power, periods of history, and often see the United States through that lens, late stage capitalism and the like. I think in the 1970s and 1980s, I think there were clear signs inside the Soviet regime of the challenges that the country was facing. Remember, even though we may have got it wrong in the United States, I think internally they understood that they were not meeting their 5-year plans, that they were facing challenges about putting too much money into the military industrial part of the economy, and they were not innovating in the way that was necessary. Some of the Soviet theorists on the military side worried about the kinds of investments that the United States was making and that the Soviets were not keeping up. A Soviet leader named Ogarkov, who thought about sort of what he referred to as the revolution in military affairs. I don't think the Chinese believe in any way that they have elements of decline in their system. I think what animates them is not only a sense of aggrievement at the highest level, the idea of reversing decades or a century of what they call humiliation, but also a sense that China's time has come, that this remarkable accumulation of power and capacity now has to exert itself fully to a leading role on the global stage. And so it's hard to compare and contrast. But I will also say that you can sense in some of the interactions between President Xi and President Putin in Russia, even though Putin is, running a country that theoretically is not ideological, he is a man of the Soviet era. And they both together bemoan the treachery of Mikhail Gorbachev. And it's very clear that this early period of partnership between the Soviet Union and China, something that Xi Jinping's father was deeply involved in, clearly animates both of their psychologies. That's a long and not very good answer to a very good question. But I do think more time has to be given to sort of thinking about this role of ideology. I do think in various eras of Soviet power beginning at the turn of the last century, they were more ambitious about internationalizing their model. Obviously, the Communist International. I don't think there are signs of a similar kind of ideological international approach of China. I think in many respects, they feel that they are unique and that can't be replicated. The steps that they've taken internationally have been to provide capacities, either technology or police services or whatever, at the behest of local authoritarians, whether it's in Africa or the Pacific or South Asia, to try to prop up leaders that tend to be more flexible on issues that matter to China.
So if you could assign Xi a book to perhaps, color his worldview in a way which, would more reflect your version of reality.
Can I also just say one thing I should have said at the beginning? Resh Doshi's book is sensational. My Soviet Power or Soviet Policy Towards South Africa is not. And it
was good. It's like a 6.5, 7.
No, not really. But
First book.
I actually won an award several years ago in Britain. Remember, I got a call about it, and they said, congratulations, Soviet Policy Towards South Africa is what award. I think, oh, terrific. What was it? It was like the book made most irrelevant by history.
No,
Seriously,
no.
seriously. So
It's coming back, man.
no, it's not. No, it's not. But I didn't
Okay.
interrupt you, but Rush's book is sensational.
All right. So I don't think she needs to read Rush's book.
Yeah. So look, let me just begin to broaden that question just a little bit. I think some of the things that we hear from people in China today suggests that the kind of information and the people that President Xi gets information from is increasingly limited.
Yeah.
And that sometimes it's hard in the system currently to speak truth to power. And so we are seeing a repeat of history of the kind that we saw in the Maoist period, where only a certain kind of leader, a certain kind of information makes it to the very top. And so that does concern us, that you like very much for the people that you're engaging with to have a deep, full understanding of the world in which they're operating. I think what we see in a variety of places like Ukraine, we think China's calculus and decision making has been informed by a number of things that are concerning. We can talk more about that as the interview goes on. And so when you ask me to read, like, what one book or one article, what I would really
Or
like,
a course, or we can.
well, I'd just like him to have a general library card where he could go in and get access to a variety of things and sort of double check the information, rosy often, that he's receiving from his underlings and his staff.
You mentioned earlier sort of, the China we're seeing today, for all the objectionable things they're doing around the world, is very different than Mao making global revolution. And I think it's probably a better thing for the world if, you have a slightly, the sort of like manifestations of the whatever, however big the ultimate ambitions are, stay, not nearly as kinetic as they were for some parts of the Cold War. Is there, how do you think about that, and what can the U.S. do to, I don't know, shape that around the edges?
So look, deterrence is a huge part of what we're involved in a variety of places, trying to make clear that provocative or adventurous activities that are antithetical to the maintenance of peace and stability will be resisted. It is true that there were periods that Mao was, talked openly about nuclear weapons use, and was quite prepared to take risks, calculated risks often, but very much prepared to take those risks. I think President Xi, in certain circumstances, has shown a propensity to take certain risks, but also has been careful in other circumstances. And if anything, I find elements of his approach not easily to predict. I wouldn't have anticipated, for instance, such a deep Chinese commitment to President Putin. It doesn't seem to be fundamentally in Chinese interest, but the more you understand the mindset of both leaders, I think you start to appreciate what animates that partnership. But a variety of things. When I, in previous periods when I worked on China, I found that their diplomats were some of the most expert and capable in the world, and they generally followed certain tenets that you could come to expect. So, for instance, when it became clear in the 1990s that some of the most important challenges for China would be from the sea, from their eastern seaboard, they quickly settled almost all their territorial disputes with the many countries that they bordered. And what you generally saw was a China that would seek to take on one or two challenges and then try to either hold or settle so that they wouldn't find themselves operating simultaneously on several fronts at once. What's surprising and a little concerning is how China has been prepared to move out in a variety of circumstances against a number of countries in ways that I think create more unity of purpose for some of these countries. There are a number of countries that would prefer a different kind of relationship, but have found it difficult. I think India, for instance, wants a deeper technology partnership, but because of the steps that China has taken along the line of actual control in 2020 and before, it's made India, much more resistant and reluctant to take those steps. And so it's again a very good broad question, and I'm struck personally by how much China in recent years has either intentionally or unintentionally alienated countries that otherwise would have preferred to partner with them.